right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Dr. Howe is going to talk with us about plastics tonight, and I'm excited about this topic because plastics are everywhere. It's absolutely ubiquitous in our society, and understanding how that impacts our health is really important. So thank you, Dr. Howe.
Well, I will admit that after studying this for the lecture this evening, I'm going to make some changes. The interesting thing about lecturing is I'm sure I learn much more than anyone that listens, because there's a lot of information that you go over and you can't share it all. There's not enough time. But after I researched this and I was thinking about it this morning, you know, you get up and you take a shower and then you look in your shower and you think, that's a plastic bottle that shampoo is in. And I wonder how that's going to end up, that plastic bottle. Where's it going to be? Is there some way I could avoid that plastic bottle? And then you finish there and you shave and you got a plastic razor with a little piece of metal and you think, oh no, how am I going to talk about this? And then you go and you eat your breakfast and you think about it, and then you brush your teeth, and what are you brushing your teeth with? A plastic toothbrush, right? So I was looking up, well, can you buy a bamboo toothbrush? Yeah, but it's got plastic bristles. Well, that's a little better because at least the handle's bamboo. And well, they do sell toothbrushes made with boar bristles, but I wasn't sure I wanted to kill a boar to brush my teeth. You know, and it started, you know, and then I got my glasses and you know, they got plastic lenses, and then I was getting dressed this morning and, you know, I was about to put on my, you know, nylon pants. Well, that's plastic too. And you know, plastic is everywhere. In fact, as your handout says, world plastic production is about 400 million tons per year. That's a lot of tons of plastic. In fact, the one estimate was last year 422 million tons of plastic produced every year in our country, in the world. And half of all plastic on the planet has been produced in the last 13 years. So plastic production has increased dramatically. There was a paper I read that said one of the reasons for that is we have much more efficient cars now, right? And we're trying to reduce fossil fuel consumption, but fossil fuel companies are producing more and more fossil fuels with fracking. And so they have pivoted and started shunting more of that oil production into plastic production. And so that keeps the cost, it supports the cost of fossil fuels, and they can still make those. It keeps fossil fuel production or gas production down, and then we think there's a shortage when really we're shunting it over into plastics. Well, we do want to save on fossil fuels, of course, and eliminate them eventually would be ideal, but we don't want to make more plastics with them. So we got a bit of a problem there, but you and I are the ones that are using the plastics, and if there's no market or less market for plastics, well, they'll have to leave more of that fossil fuel in the ground, I guess, which would be all right. The thing that was most concerning to me was that 45%, 30 to 45%, some sources say, others say up to 50%, of all plastics produced is single-use plastic. You use it once and you toss it. The average time single plastic is used is about 12 to 15 minutes, and it takes about 500 years to decompose. They think. We haven't had plastic for 500 years, so that's the estimate. That's amazing, isn't it? Single-use plastic. 35 to 45, maybe 50% of all plastics made. And that really, I started thinking now, how can I use my plastics if I'm going to use them longer and avoid that single-use plastic? The other statistic that really got my attention was the next one. If current trends continue by 2050, the plastics in the ocean will outweigh the fish in the ocean. Imagine that? That's a lot of plastic. I had a patient who held the world record for deep sea diving, and he was asked by National Geographic to go and take pictures where he had taken pictures before. They wanted to see how the oceans had changed over his professional career, and he said to National Geographic, "No, I won't do it." And they said, "Nobody says no to National Geographic." He said, "Well, I say no." They said, "Why?" He said, "It's too depressing." And I asked him, I said, why is it so depressing? He said, "Well, I visited a group of islands in the South Pacific 20 years ago. They were pristine, beautiful, white sandy beaches, no people living on this little group of islands, fish abundant in the water, coral was gorgeous." He said last year, and this was 2 years ago now, no, 3 years ago now, he said, "I went back and there were bales of plastic on the beaches 6 feet high, and the water surrounding the islands were devoid of fish because the plastic had killed them all." He said, "If you get a fish and you get ready to eat it, instead you put it under a microscope, it's full of plastic." One of the statistics here that really caught my attention as well was 90% of seabirds have plastic in their stomachs. They die of it. Many birds die of plastic in their stomachs. And yet we're dumping plastic into the ocean. 500 million plastic straws are thrown away in the U.S. every day. Can you imagine that? That's more than one a person. I know no one here uses plastic straws, but if you see someone, you might mention to them, "Do you know that 500 million of those are thrown away every day in the U.S.? Do you really need to use that plastic straw?" That's a lot of plastics that we don't have to. How many of you can drink water without a straw? Yeah. So, straws are kind of neat. Kids like to play with them, but can't we get by without straws? 500 million of them. That's a pile. That's more than a truckload. I mean, imagine that. Every day, 500 million. Less than 10% of plastic is recycled. I mean, you hear about recycling plastic, but less than 10% of it is recycled. How about coffee cups? There are 50 billion coffee cups with plastic lids that are thrown away each year in the U.S. And 99% of those, 99.75% of those coffee cups are non-recyclable because they have plastic over the paper, or they have some sort of coating that's plastic on them. You say, "Well, I'm using a paper cup." Yeah, but if it holds water and doesn't leak, and you set it on the counter and walk away and it doesn't leak when you come back 10 minutes later, it's more than paper. It's plastic coated. 50 billion coffee cups. That's a lot. That's a lot, and that's just the U.S. So think about those things when you're thinking about plastic. More than 1/3 of all microplastics in the ocean come from synthetic clothing. Amazing. Anybody wearing fleece here tonight? I was reading this to my wife, and she said, "I guess I'm going to have to get rid of my fleece." I said, "No, don't do it. Where would they put it?" Yeah. And you know how that gets into the water? Because we do something called washing our clothes. And the microfibers break down because they're pretty fragile, and they get into the wash water, and then they go to the sewer plant, and then it's purified and the water's released into the river. And it's pure of lots of things, but not of microplastics. So think about that, and maybe wear a wool sweater or cotton pants. As I mentioned, I was putting on my clothes this morning. I thought, what can I wear tonight that won't be plastic? So I've got on some nice wool pants, but this has polyester in it, and that's plastic too, and microfibers go from that into the water. 1/3 of all microplastics in the ocean are from synthetic clothing. That's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. Plastic workers are at increased risk, and I mentioned this down lower, for these diseases, and I mentioned the seabirds. So plastics, you're sitting on plastic. This floor is plastic. This desk top, this Formica, that's plastic. This is plastic right here. That board back there has plastic in it. The screen has plastic in it. We're surrounded by plastics. It's a wonderful material. It's used extensively in building. As I was driving here to the lecture tonight, I was looking at houses, and vinyl siding, right? Plastic. The soffits up in the corner of the roof, plastic. And on it goes. I just laid some flooring for my son, laminate flooring. What's that? Plastic. And what's more, laminate flooring is flexible, right? Why is it flexible? It's got phthalates in it. And we're going to talk about phthalates next here, shortly. Phthalates aren't good for kids to crawl around on, as you'll see. So I wish I'd studied this before I laid that flooring. I tried to talk him out of it, but he said, no, it's really good and durable, and think again. Anyway, there are substances that we've known about, and I'm sure you've heard about in plastics. The two that are talked about the most, and those that I'll talk about tonight, are phthalates and BPA. But another problem, a big problem, is microplastics that I've mentioned. And they're now nanoplastics, and they're smaller particles. You cannot get away from nanoplastics on this earth. You can't do it. They've been found on top of Mount Everest. They've been found in the Marianas Trench, the deepest part of the earth. You cannot get away from microplastics, and particularly nanoplastics. We breathe them. Take a breath. You just breathe in some plastic. When you brush your teeth, some of that breaks off and you get some microplastics. It's enough to make you paranoid almost. Yeah.
Water filters plastic.
Pardon?
Water filters.
Some water filters are plastic, and it's hard to filter out nanoplastics. Water bottles, they've shown, have a lot of plastic in the water just from the sides of them. So plastic is ubiquitous. Fortunately, plastic is not terribly toxic. If it was, I wouldn't be lecturing tonight and you wouldn't be here tonight. We'd all be dead. It's pretty safe, but large exposure over a long time gives us problems. All right, so microplastics cause problems in our bodies, and it's estimated that the average person today, by the time they're through with life, will have consumed or breathed 20 kilograms of microplastic. 20 kilos. How many pounds is that? 44 pounds of microplastics are going to get into, and some, fortunately, get out of your body. We could start a new weight loss program. Avoid microplastics. they are a real problem. They increase your risk of lung cancer and of asthma and of hypersensitivity pneumonitis. They cause fatigue. Anybody tired? Cut down on your microplastics or go to bed earlier, I don't know, but don't sleep in synthetic sheets, right? And I had never thought of that. So cotton for me, right? Avoid those microplastics. Dizziness. Those are inhaled microplastics. If you ingest them, you have an increased risk of inflammatory bowel disease and an increased risk of irritable bowel disease from the microplastics. Why? Well, one thing is if you eat enough microplastics, it changes the gut microbiome, and we've talked about that here before. It's not something that you want to do. It alters the gut microbiome, and as a result of that, you have an increased risk of digestive cancers. You also have an increased risk of atherosclerosis. You know those plaques that build up in your arteries? They found, looking with microscopes at those, that there are microplastics in those. And microplastics in the body are foreign substances, and the body recognizes them and tries to get rid of them. Fortunately, they're quite inert. If they weren't, we'd have even more of a problem. But they are in atherosclerotic plaques and are associated with increased risk of heart attack and strokes and all that. So, you know, plastic is ubiquitous in the body as well as outside of, and we want to do what we can to reduce our ingestion of them and our breathing of them. So let's go from microplastics to the two most common substances. There are others, but we'll mention the two that cause problems, many of the problems in us humans, animals too for that matter. The first is phthalates. These are substances that soften plastic and make it flexible to some degree. And phthalates are quite common in that flooring that I put down in my son's house, that lovely laminate flooring. You know, it just looks so nice. It's probably better than the carpet he had in there, which was pretty decrepit, but phthalates are anti-androgen. They reduce the effect of testosterone in our bodies, particularly in men. And you may know that sperm counts are dropping in our country, and male fertility is a bigger problem, due in part to phthalates. There are some estrogen effects too. Estrogen synthesis and thyroid hormone production is also affected by phthalates. Interestingly, children born to mothers with a phthalate level higher than the 70th percentile have decreased IQ, up to 7.6 points below children born to mothers below the 75th percentile. There may be a few politicians whose mothers had high phthalate levels, but we won't mention any of their names. But it does make you wonder what's happening to us as a human race. Or are we going to make all the progress that we thought we were with the IQ levels demonstrably lower with phthalate production? This study was done in inner cities where there was quite a bit of phthalate exposure, but it's true with anyone. Any mother who's pregnant should do her best to minimize her exposure to plastics, particularly those containing phthalates. And there are other things as well. BPA, this is another additive to plastics. You might be interested to know that over 1,000 different chemicals are added to plastics to modify their characteristics. but these are just two that we'll talk about tonight. Maternal exposure to BPA during pregnancy increases hyperactivity and aggression in 2-year-old girls. Can you imagine that? Who wants an aggressive 2-year-old? They're aggressive enough, aren't they? Terrible twos. Maybe it's from BPA. Who knew? But they also cause other problems. In boys, they have a slightly different effect. BPA exposure is associated with increased aggression and emotional reactivity in 3 to 5-year-old boys, and increased depression and anxiety at 7 years of age. 7 years later, what the mother was exposed to and her BPA level is still affecting that child. That's serious. Depression is epidemic in our world today, particularly in the young, and perhaps it's secondary to plastic exposure. Then we have the whole problem with, well, one more. Also, boys have increased withdrawal and defiance. So if your grandchildren or your children, little boys, are defiant, think about BPA. And BPA has been found in many of children's toys. And you say, well, haven't they eliminated it all? Yeah, they've eliminated most of it and replaced it with BPS and BPF and others, which are equally a problem. So if it says BPA free, good, but that doesn't mean it's bisphenol S or F free. So minimize plastic toys for children. Bottom line, you want to really minimize them. That's so important. Then BPA also, as many of you know, affects the risk for hormonal cancers. Increased risk of breast, ovarian, uterine cancer, and prostate cancer in men. So you want to minimize your exposure to those. Well, enough of the bad news. Let's look at what you can do to reduce your exposure. You could try moving to Mars, but you might have to travel in a plastic spaceship. I don't know, so that might not do too well. Number one, say no to plastic straws. I mean, really, do you have to use a straw? No. And encourage other people to. If no one buys them, they're going to stop making them. And 500 million straws a year in this country alone, I'd like to get rid of those. We don't need plastic straws in most cases. There are some swallowing disorders in elderly patients where they swallow better if they use a straw, but that's pretty minimal, and it certainly isn't 500 million.
Straws have plastic lining?
Paper straws have plastic lining, so there you go. And the next one we've heard about many times, use cloth bags, cotton bags, or something like that to carry your groceries in and your goods in. Don't use plastic bags. If you do use plastic bags, at least reuse them over and over again. If you got plastic bags at home, use them. I mean, if you throw them out, well, they're still on Earth. But try to avoid buying them. I often go to a hardware store or Lowe's or wherever, and I try never to use one of their bags. If I don't have a bag with me, I just kind of carry out. They say, don't you need a bag? No, I don't need a bag. So minimize those bags. There's a tremendous amount of plastic bags used that don't really need to be. Fill your pockets, I don't care. But avoid using those plastic bags. Never litter. Why? Well, what happens when you litter? It blows around and it forms microplastics. It's much better with plastic to put it in a landfill. Is the landfill ideal? No, it's not ideal, but it's better than letting it blow around and then you get microplastics in the air that we all breathe. If you see plastic blowing down the road, guess what? It's forming microplastics. They're going to be in the air. Plastic is used in car tires. And what do we do with car tires? We drive them down the road and it sends microplastics into the air. I'm not saying don't drive, but think about it. Don't use face wash or toothpaste with microbeads. Microbeads are plastic. And avoid that. You can absorb microplastics right through your skin, ladies. And you don't want to do that.
How do you know it's got a...
Read the label. Yeah, if it's in it, it's got to be in the label. And be careful with that. You know, someone was telling me there's a place in town that you can get toothpaste refilled without...
Yeah, actually, on Pleasant Street.
Yeah.
Next to the Holy Donut, there's a place that doesn't say, and they do, if you bring your container, they do refillables, and they even sell glass containers.
Good.
But
So-
you can refill all kinds of things, toothpaste, this, that. I haven't gone in, but they're not doing a lot of business.
Well, maybe we ought to give them some business and then critique them on their products so they improve them. I don't know. But anytime you can reuse a plastic bottle rather than tossing it, well, that saves it. You know, I don't want a lot of plastic around me, period, but if you got it there, it's better to reuse it. Snack on fruit rather than stuff in a crinkly bag. I mean, can you imagine the amount of plastic that has snacks in it? It's phenomenal. And remember what plastics do to the planet and to your breathing and to your gut. And if you get snacks in a plastic bag, you're going to have them on what's in the bag. Now, it's awfully nice to use Ziploc bags and that sort of thing in lunches. I saw someone eating something out of a Ziploc bag or a baggie when I came in. I won't mention who they were. But if you're going to use those, reuse them. Don't just throw them out, and minimize your use of them. Store things in glass or in metal containers whenever possible. It makes a big difference. Visit the farmer's market. Why? They don't bring their stuff in plastic, do they? I mean, if you get it to the store, it's all in plastic containers. You notice Cheryl's dates, they were in a plastic container. The soybeans were in a plastic container. She doesn't do that all the time. She buys in bulk, and they come in paper bags. I know we buy in bulk all the time, and if you buy dates in bulk, it comes in a cardboard box, and it has a piece of paper over it. It's not in plastic. The more you buy in bulk, the less plastic you'll use. We get our oats in 50-pound bags and not in little plastic containers. And the same with nuts. And so anytime you buy in bulk, you can store in glass jars, and then you've cut plastic use tremendously. Really important to think about these things. Avoid using disposable cups and tableware and plastic straws, as I've mentioned. You know, I was thinking about, we have a potluck after church every week, and they use plasticware. Well, I want to change that. You know, you can use stainless. You can get some a tremendous waste. Oh, wash them, but it's better than plasticware. Here's another one, cook at home. Why does cooking at home save? Well, if you go out to a fast food place, what do they put food in? Plastic, or styrofoam, which is plastic, or paper that has plastic on it. And 40% of meals in this country are eaten out. Did you know that? 40% of meals are eaten out at restaurants and fast food places. Well, if we did more cooking at home, we'd cut plastic use tremendously. Don't use plastics in the microwave, of course, you've heard that. Store food in glass. Wear natural fabrics whenever you can. And number 10, vote. I mean, this needs to be addressed on a political level. I didn't tell you how to vote, but think about it. Who's going to be the most sensitive to environmental issues in our town, in our state? We won't go beyond that because we're having enough trouble tonight with that, whatever it is, debate. It won't be a debate, it'll be a shout on one side anyway. So vote intelligently, think about these things, and go home tonight and think, what can I do to reduce my exposure to plastics? What can I do to reduce my grandkids' exposure to plastics? Anyone here want a dumb grandkid? Well, then don't expose them to plastics. I mean, 7.6 point drop in IQ that's a difference. So think about it. Any questions?
Using a plastic water glass over and over again, then I'm thinking is not good.
You're better off to use stainless or glass, but don't go home and throw out all your plastic. Just don't buy more. Okay, and it's the same with your fleece. Enjoy your fleece, keep it, but don't buy more. And if you're going to wash it, great. You might want to put a filter on your washing machine because you can capture a lot of that before it breaks down from, sizable fragments to tiny ones. And that's better than letting it go out in the water to the sea, to the ocean. Remember, 35% of all microplastics is from clothing. Yeah, question.
Just a second. Who asked about the cup? Yeah, right here. So he just said don't go out and throw your plastics away. I did. I went home and I cleaned out my kitchen of all those plastic containers we put our leftovers in.
Did you bury them in the backyard?
No, I threw them away, so they got into the landfill. But we take our hot food, right? And we put our hot food in these plastic containers.
Bad idea.
It's a bad idea because that hot food is leaching those things into the food itself. So as we transitioned, I store things in glass mason jars. I store things in glass Pyrex type dishes. I don't have any more plastic containers in my house because I don't want that garbage in my kids' bodies.
Question, and then here.
Many years ago at the Seventh-day Adventist Church, they had a co-op where you couldn't use 50 pounds of oats. You could share that 50-pound bag. Is there a co-op in the area to do that now?
There are several co-ops, and you can buy online. What's the one that meets Azure Standard? Azure Standard has a drop-off at is it the Baptist Church in Lisbon Falls? My wife goes there. They have a great one. We ought to start another similar co-op right locally. It would be wonderful. Cheryl.
So Associated Buyers was that co-op at the Brunswick Adventist Church. So our local natural food store, Morning Glory, you can do bulk through them, and a lot of their stuff comes through Associated Buyers. Azure Standard, if you'll just go onto their website, Azure Standard, you can put in your zip code, and it will tell you where the nearest co-op is to you. And sometimes there are several of them, and you can choose and get connected in that kind of way.
And you can buy online in bulk.
Yeah.
Essential Organics is another one. Mm-hmm. Country Life is another one as well that you can buy in bulk online. Yeah. Question or comment?
I'm concerned because all of my water that I drink, I filter in a Brita filter, which is plastic, and the filter that goes in it is in plastic. And I don't know what's in the filter, but I have to filter my drinking water simply because I already know it's loaded with plastic. But
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that. There are filters that are not plastic, and we ought to look into that. You had a comment, Kate.
I just wanted to say, we have a carbon block filter in our home filtering system with our copper pipes and a filter, but the same thing, the container that holds the carbon is plastic, right? The carbon
Yeah.
filters very well.
Yeah, the carbon filters are a bit better, and I don't think more expensive. So, question?
Our recycle facility in Freeport accepts all solid or firm plastic, but any of the soft plastics or foam plastics or any of that stuff are not recyclable. Is that stuff burned in the biomass plant?
You know, it may be, but the worst thing that you can do is burn plastic. That releases more toxicity than anything else you can do with plastics. I didn't bring the data, I've got it on my notes at home, but there are like 15 different toxic chemicals, including phosgene, that are released with burning plastics. Please don't burn plastics. And we shouldn't burn them and recycle. You know, even if they say they have all these filters, no, don't burn plastic. Toluene, xylene, acetone, all are released with the burning of plastics. They're all carcinogens. Yeah, don't burn plastics. Please don't burn them at home because that's really toxic.
I had to bring this up again, but I'm concerned, and we have plastic water glasses because my eyesight is so poor, I'm breaking a lot of the glasses in the sink. So we bought plastic water glasses, and my concern is by filling that with cold water over and over again, daily, weekly, am I ingesting some of that plastic?
Yes, you are, because it does wear off. It's minimal, and you can probably do just fine, but they do make glasses out of glass that are non-breakable. Yeah, and you could look for those as well. And there's stainless steel as well. A stainless steel glass works unless it's a hot liquid, then it kind of warms your hand a bit more than you might want.
You also have to be careful with the stainless steel because they're not all created equal. You want to make sure that it's lead-free.
Right.
Stanley has gotten into trouble lately because people were spending loads of money on their cups and their water bottles, not realizing they were buying lead. So be mindful.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for coming, and be thoughtful about plastics.